Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom.
In our top story, the IDF's Homefront Command has announced that northern Israel has finally been restored to full activity. On October 8, 2023, Hezbollah unleashed a barrage of thousands of rockets and suicide drones on the Jewish state. More than 60,000 Israelis living in the north were forced to evacuate their homes. The IDF has been working around the clock to clear and secure northern Israel. It launched Operation Northern Shield to fortify 17 communities within a mile of the Lebanese border and is installing more than 1,200 bomb shelters in the area. Following a situational assessment led by IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi and approved by Defense Minister Israel Katz, Jerusalem announced last week that the residents of northern Israel can finally come home.
U.S. President Donald Trump has officially rescinded former President Joe Biden's memo that targeted Israel and allowed him to withhold weapons from the Jewish state. In February of 2024, as Israel was being attacked on 7 different fronts, Joe Biden signed Memorandum 20. This memorandum requires the United States government to provide reports to Congress on the use of American weapons by other countries. 1 month later, the Biden administration announced erroneously that Israel may have violated international humanitarian law in Gaza. But U.S. officials could not identify any specific instances of breaches that harm civilians. President Trump vowed to examine this policy and to reinstate the flow of much-needed weapons to the Jewish state. Shortly after his inauguration, Trump ordered a review of all national security memorandums, and last week he announced that Memorandum 20 had officially been repealed.
The Israel Defense Forces has launched a major operation dubbed Iron Wall to secure the biblical heartland from Palestinian terror threats. Defense Minister Israel Katz said that Israel is engaged in a war against Islamic terrorism in Judea and Samaria. He instructed the IDF to clear several camps that have been breeding grounds for jihadism and to prevent the terrorists from returning. Katz also suspended all UNRWA activity in the area. Israeli Armor Corps units were dispatched to the Menashe Brigade area for the first time since Operation Defensive Shield in 2002. The IDF released a statement saying that elite forces continue operations to thwart terrorism throughout the biblical heartland.
Israeli fighter jets staged a low flyover during the funeral procession of former Hezbollah terror leader Hassan Nasrallah last week. Thousands of pro-Iranian fighters filled the streets of Beirut to honor the brutal terror boss who was eliminated in an Israeli airstrike in September. Representatives from major Islamic terror groups attended the procession in a show of solidarity with the severely weakened Iranian proxy army. Defense Minister Israel Katz praised the show of force by the Israeli military to the crowds of radical jihadis. He stressed that the Israeli Air Force jets flying over the funeral of Nasrallah conveys a clear message that those who threaten to destroy Israel, this will be their end. Katz said, "They specialize in funerals, we specialize in victories."
The hardline Islamic Republic of Iran is on high alert amid concerns that the U.S. and Israel could strike its nuclear facilities. The radical Shiite regime is suffering from crippling sanctions imposed against it as part of President Trump's maximum pressure campaign. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to finish the job with Iran, and according to reports, Iranian regime officials are becoming increasingly fearful of a preemptive strike. This, coupled with the devastating losses of its proxy armies, has reportedly sent Tehran into a panic. The British Telegraph reported that Tehran bolstered air defenses around key nuclear and missile facilities and raised the national alert level too high.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is calling for the full demilitarization of southern Syria and the protection of the Druze community living there. IDF officers have confirmed they are working around the clock to destroy stockpiles of weapons inside Syria that pose an imminent threat to the security of the Jewish state. Netanyahu announced that IDF troops will remain in the Mount Hermon sector and the buffer zone indefinitely to protect Israeli communities and thwart possible attacks. He said Israel will not allow jihadist forces or the new Syrian army to enter territory south of Damascus. Netanyahu went on to warn that any threats to the Druze communities there would be met with force. The Druze people claim they are the descendants of Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses. They are an ancient people who lived in the Levant region bordering Israel, Syria, and Lebanon for hundreds of years. Israeli Druze are fiercely loyal to the Jewish state and proudly serve in the Israeli army. Druze on the Syrian side of the border have repeatedly been targeted by Islamic terror groups and have expressed concern that the new Syrian regime will slaughter them just as ISIS did in 2018.
Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar briefed a delegation of American lawmakers on Turkey's attempts to rebuild the Iranian-backed Hezbollah terror group in Lebanon. Sa'ar briefed the bipartisan delegation of House representatives on regional issues and on Tehran's efforts to restore Hezbollah as a military and economic force in Lebanon. Israel's Channel 14 News aired an explosive expose detailing the transfer of tens of millions of dollars to Hezbollah from Turkey. Iran is desperately attempting to rearm its proxy Hezbollah, and according to reports, Turkish leader Tayyip Erdogan has made the Istanbul airport available to the fanatic Islamic Republic. Tehran is sending supplies and funds on Iranian passenger flights, which are then transported from Istanbul to Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Participants in the annual Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC, made history by publicly affirming Israel's right to sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. CPAC is the largest annual political conference for conservative activists. Its endorsement of sovereignty conveys a strong message. President Trump attended the conference. Senior and conservative political leaders used the platform to express their desire for the United States to support Israel in extending sovereignty throughout all of Judea and Samaria. Israel Gantz, the head of the Yesha Council and the governor of the Benjamin region, praised CPAC participants for their bold statement. He said this resolution is akin to the Balfour Declaration. It grants political validity to biblical values and justice. This statement was immediately followed by a similar one issued during the National Religious Broadcasters event in Dallas, Texas.
The head of the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom is calling for an investigation into the BBC to determine if it paid money to Hamas. The British Broadcasting Corporation recently produced a show about life in Gaza through the eyes of children. After the documentary aired, the narrator was identified as the son of a senior member of Hamas. British opposition leader Kemi Badenoch called for an investigation into allegations that the network paid a license fee to Hamas terrorists in the course of making the film. Badenoch wrote a scathing letter to the Director General of the BBC, calling for an inquiry into potential collusion with the Iranian proxy in Gaza and the possibility of payments to terrorists. She also called for a complete review of the BBC to eliminate the channel's systematic and institutional bias against Israel.
Israeli archaeologists have published a study on the excavations of a royal palace found just steps from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The article, published in the Israeli archaeological journal Atikot, makes some startling observations that seem to support the biblical account. The unique rock-hewn palace consists of 8 rooms with facilities including wine and olive presses. It also holds a personal stone altar set above a drainage canal, which researchers proved was in use during the First Temple period. The monument was decommissioned and sealed off around the 8th century BCE, coinciding with the reigns of Hezekiah and Josiah. The Bible describes the religious reforms implemented by the kings of Judah to centralize worship at the temple in Jerusalem by abolishing ritual sites throughout the kingdom. Archaeologists believe that the shrine was sealed during these reforms in ancient Israel.
2 major American Christian organizations joined forces calling for Israeli sovereignty throughout Judea and Samaria. President Trump is set to make a statement on the status of the biblical heartland in a matter of weeks, and Bible-believing Christians are working to make sure that he knows they stand with Israel. Members of American Christian Leaders for Israel announced this historic resolution during the National Religious Broadcasters Conference. It says we affirm the Jewish people's inalienable right to the biblical heartland of Israel and reject all efforts to pressure the Jewish people to relinquish their ancestral homeland in Judea and Samaria. 3,000 Christian leaders and heads of organizations, together with the NRB leadership, signed this resolution.
That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Moshe Koppel. He's the founding chairman of Kohelet. Moshe, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Tell our viewers a little about what is Kohelet.
Kohelet is the biggest policy shop in Israel on the conservative side. We work on everything from free market economics and individual liberty to what makes Israel the Jewish nation state to how do you fight the deep state.
Everyone is saying Trump this, Trump that, toast of the town. You can't get through a conversation without people getting excited about something Trump is doing. Why? Why is it so exciting here for Israelis?
Well, for us, it's like a change from night to day, okay? We've been fighting a war on 7 fronts, and instead of the American administration in Biden's days having our back, they were kind of, hey, you guys got to give humanitarian aid to Hamas. You guys have got to, you can't fight this battle. You can't use those weapons. And all of a sudden, we've got a real friend in the White House who's got our back.
Everyone knows that America and Israel's back together again. We're seeing the lines of diplomats waiting to meet with the heads of state here in Israel once again. Why is it so important that there's this alliance between America and Israel?
Well, the important thing to understand is that the United States and Israel do not have a relationship of a supplicant coming, Israel coming to ask for a great favor from the United States. The relationship is a real partnership. We have a commonality of values. We've got the same friends and the same enemies, and we believe in the same things. And when we work together, we can get a tremendous amount done for the United States, for Israel, and for Western civilization in general.
Everyone talks about how America and Israel are the only 2 countries that are founded on Judeo-Christian values. That's really what brings us together. That's why we're best friends. Now we're seeing that Bible-believing Christians are taking in incredible positions of power. We see Pete Hegseth as the Secretary of Defense. We see Paula White in the Office of Faith. The new ambassador is Mike Huckabee. So why is it so important that people of faith get involved in political processes like this?
What we really need to do is make sure that Western civilization is strengthened. A civilization takes centuries, even millennia to build, but it takes 1 generation to destroy it. And it's a risky business. So Israel and the United States, both of whom believe in the values of Western civilization, of family, of community, of faith, of nation, all these things that we have in common, we've got to fight those battles together. And people who believe in Western civilization, who believe in religion, people of faith, are the ones who you can rely on in the end. They're going to get the job done.
One thing that's interesting about Kohelet is that you look at things in a long term. You're not like, what's happening tomorrow, what's happening next? Well, what's going to happen in 10 years? Today, everyone's talking about our greatest threat, Iran. What's the threats of the future?
First of all, there are civilizational and cultural threats, which I talk about, right? When you have religion diminishing and families breaking apart and people not having children, that's a long-term threat to survival, for Western civilization and for nations like Israel and the United States. But in addition to that, we've got enemies all over the place, right? So if we destroy Iran's nuclear program tomorrow, the day after that we might have to be dealing with Turkey. We might have to be dealing with China, right? So we've got a lot of enemies. We've got to stay vigilant.
How important is it that we're at lock and step with the Trump administration going into some of these challenges, like Iran, like what's happening in Gaza? We just heard his plan a few weeks ago to make it an American enclave. How important is it that we work together on these issues?
Nothing good is going to get done unless we're working together. When there's daylight between the United States and Israel, nothing gets done, not with Iran, not with Turkey, not in Gaza, not with Hezbollah up in Lebanon. But when we work together, we're going to win.
We see that in Israel, there's been a real revival. There's been a coming back to the Torah, to the family. We have the highest birth rate in the Western world. Why is that happening here in a time of war?
You have to understand the history. Israel was founded in 1948 mostly by secular socialists who were rebelling against diaspora religion, which they thought was kind of old-fashioned, and they thought that the new world was going to be a world of socialism and secular cosmopolitanism. And demographically, that's just been changing over the decades. And what you saw in the last election when a coalition was formed, that coalition was completely by people who were traditional, who respect religion. The entire coalition consisted of people who have great respect for tradition and religion. And that was a wake-up call for the left. That was one of the reasons that the left reacted so violently to something like judicial reform, which I was involved with. We needn't get into the details of that, but the important thing to know is that the left saw that as part of the resurgence of the conservative and religious right.
Everyone's talking about sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. President Trump is going to make a big announcement, maybe in a week, maybe 10 days. What do you expect to see?
It's hard to know. Trump is the greatest president we've ever had, the greatest friend Israel's ever had. But even a week before his announcement, I have not got a clue what he intends to say, honestly. I expect that it'll be consistent with what he's done until now, which has been very, very much pro-Israel and pro-Israel's security and stability and safety. I'm expecting a really positive statement.
What would be your dream statement? If you could write the statement from President Trump, what would you want to hear from him on the issue of sovereignty?
I would want President Trump to say, you Israelis, you know your situation on the ground. You know your security needs. You know what's important to you. You know where there are dense Arab concentrations, and you know where the Jewish settlements are and where the security needs are. Do what you need to do, and you've got my back.
Moshe, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Israel and the United States are best of friends. We share values. We share the values of Western civilization, and you can trust your friends in Israel, like Kohelet and others, to push those same values within Israel and in partnership with the United States.
Moshe, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now the truth from Zion.
Is peace in the Middle East possible? In recent years, the region's geopolitical landscape was rapidly changing for the better. But now Hamas has brought the process to a screeching halt, at least for the time being. On October 7, 2023, the terror organization launched a savage war on Israel. It delayed what could have been major social betterment for Jews, Muslims, and Christians in the region and throughout the world. Israel and Saudi Arabia are two nations that were once considered unlikely partners for peace. But in recent times, Jerusalem and Riyadh brought their relationship to new heights. In September 2023, for the first time, out loud and in public, Saudi officials discussed establishing diplomatic ties with Israel and cooperation for a safer, more prosperous region. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told Fox News that an agreement with Israel via the Biden administration would be the biggest historical agreement since the Cold War. What brought these two countries together was a mutual understanding that Iran is the Middle East's biggest opponent to peace. The Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is terrorizing their citizens at home, and a nuclear-armed Iran would threaten not only the region but the entire world. Meanwhile, Israel has been focused on creating prosperity across continents. Both Israel and Saudi Arabia believe the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action Accord, or JCPOA, does very little to address serious concerns about Iran's nuclear ambitions. Both nations want to stop Iran from acquiring weapons of mass destruction, which is already causing a destabilizing arms race in the region. Iran has repeatedly declared it plans to wipe Israel off the face of the map. Saudi Arabia and Israel also understand that the JCPOA does not confront Iran's support of proxy groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in Yemen. These terror organizations are constantly creating regional conflicts. In 2018, the Anti-Defamation League found Saudi textbooks included passages that spread hatred or violence against Jews, Christians, Shiite Muslims, women, and anybody who mocks or converts out of Islam. By 2020, those paragraphs were removed, revealing a new message of tolerance. But peace has to be practical as well as social. During the G20 summit in New Delhi, India in September 2023, Saudi Arabia and Israel proposed creating a new rail system that would link Europe with the Middle East through Israel. Leaders from the United States, India, the European Union, and Saudi Arabia unveiled not only the railway plan, but also a sea transport corridor to connect India to Europe through the Middle East. The ambitious project would create a new trade route for Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The proposal was announced just 1 month before Hamas launched a barbaric massacre in Israel. Saudi Arabia also has another special project underway that could involve cooperation with Israel. It's called Noam, and it's Saudi Arabia's City of the Future, set to open in 2024. It's an ambitious megacity planned for construction in northwest Saudi Arabia near the borders of Jordan and Egypt. The vision is for it to be a hub for technology, innovation, and sustainable living with a focus on energy, biotechnology, and tourism. Saudi Arabia has expressed an interest in working with Israel because of Israel's expertise in the high-tech sector. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu played a pivotal role in establishing diplomatic channels throughout the Middle East. His relentless pursuit in creating relationships with leaders in the region has paved the way for the possibility of peace. However, Iran is actively working to derail all of this progress. The radical Shiite nation views an Israeli-Saudi alliance as a threat and has sought to undermine any chances of success.
The horrific attack on October 7 was orchestrated by Iran. Iran knew that Israel was close to making peace with Saudi Arabia, and they saw this as a threat on their influence in the Middle East. Iran instructed Hamas to attack Israel to thwart peace in the region.
A peace accord between Saudi Arabia and Israel would mark a symbolic cessation of the Arab boycott against Israel. There are 22 member states in the Arab League. A deal with Saudi Arabia would mean that 7 out of 22 have penned peace agreements with Israel and are open to strengthening relations with a Jewish state. As we witness these remarkable developments unfolding, we hope for a future where peace prevails over strife in the Middle East. Up next, the ICEJ Report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Since Israel was brutally attacked by Hamas on October 7th of last year, the demand for mental health care in Israel has surged. This is especially true for those suffering with some form of post-traumatic stress. Israeli experts are estimating that 1 in 3 individuals impacted by the conflict will grapple with trauma symptoms for years to come.
Since 1980, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem has been a voice of Christian support for Israel and connected the global church to the land of the Bible. Headquartered in Jerusalem, the ICEJ has taken action to stand with Israel by caring for Holocaust survivors, helping Jewish families return home to Israel, providing bomb shelters, fighting anti-Semitism around the world, and by inviting Christians to discover Israel for themselves.
Over the past year, the Christian Embassy has responded to this urgent need by supporting a variety of trauma therapy programs, most notably for emergency first responders and for children. One such initiative is a new recovery home we funded in the Galilee that serves as a haven for those experiencing acute trauma symptoms. The home is now self-supporting and uses creative therapy methods to help people find their balance in life more quickly. Elsewhere, we have sponsored therapeutic horseback riding sessions, as well as therapeutic group retreats for emergency and medical first response teams. The ICEJ recently bought 2 therapy horses, which service many recovering youths and have proven quite successful. A young boy named Erez was held hostage in Gaza for 50 days and managed to survive mentally by remembering his times riding his favorite horse. After his release, Erez was so glad to be back on a horse again. The ICEJ also sponsored special training courses for medical professionals dealing with severely injured patients and Jewish-Arab tensions in the workplace. We also helped to fund renovations of a new trauma recovery center in Jerusalem, as well as provided large protected rooms for group therapy sessions in a resilience center in the south of Israel. These are just some of the ways the Christian Embassy has been helping Israelis overcome the trauma of this difficult war.
After Hamas brutally attacked Israel on October the 7th, 2023, the ICEJ has been actively standing with Israel and her people through advocacy and urgently needed aid projects. Now is the time for Christians to turn their love for Israel and the Jewish people into real action as never before. Your donation will help deliver bomb shelters to at-risk areas, provide necessary supplies for first responders, support affected citizens with trauma care, and will eventually help rebuild these devastated communities. Visit ICEJUSA.tv to donate online or call 1-800-910-6355 and give your generous gift today.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.